That open basement window was at the side of the house, underneath an unlocked metal grille. If an intruder had got in this way, there would be evidence here on the outside as well as on the inside.
And that's exactly what the photographs show me.
Just as the Ramsey case could have and arguably should have been solved in the first 5 minutes using just the snow narrative, it could and arguably should have been solved just looking at the basement window for a good, full, proper 60 seconds of attention. And in the same way that no footprints in snow proves or ought to prove no one came into the house from the outside, if you get the broken window part right, you've disproved the intruder theory all over again. Snap, just like that.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. I've often said we suck at subtlety, and if you reckon you don't, you probably suck even more. The best way to not suck at subtlety is to acknowledge that you do suck. And if there's one area that's really subtle, not always but often, it's nature. Think about the change in seasons. It starts very subtle, and when you look again, it's everywhere and very obvious. Think about a sunburn as well. You're lying in the sun, don't notice something until it's too late. To express what I mean about subtlety and the Ramsey case, have a look at this picture. I'm guessing some of you have never seen it before. Some of you have, but even if you have you really studied it? And we need to do this to sort of fire up our subtlety detectors so we can think using not just warmed up but fiery hot rocket science when we deal with that window and the pesky strands of web. What are we to make of those bits of quicksilver blinking in the glare of the officer's flashlight? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, what we see in this image is the entire lawn of the Ramsey home covered in snow. We don't often see the Ramsey home from this vantage point, certainly not when it's covered in snow. And guess what? So is the street as well. Globs of snow are spattered across the walkway as well. Those candy canes in the background show that this image wasn't shot a year later or weeks later, but perhaps even before the crime scene tape was placed around the house, or perhaps just after the crime scene tape was removed. Guess what? The crime scene tape only encircled the house on the afternoon of the 26th, while JonBenet's body was still in the house. Now, in order to orient the direction the sun rises and sets around the house, around the garden, well, we need to orient the entire house over a map of Boulder. Why would we want to even do that? Well, it tells us where the sun is in this image, as well as what time it is. But the thing I want to emphasize here is how the right side of the garden, the part under Burke's bedroom window and outside the front door, is in shade, while the left side of the house and the garden, in other words the south side, is in sun. We also know that Burke admitted that his bedroom sometimes got so cold he went to sleep in his sister's bedroom. This may provide some illustration as to why that was the case. But the main point I want to make here isn't a huge epiphany. It's a rather subtle point. It's that the amounts of snow fluctuate depending on the time of day, and equally, you can have snow transferred onto the walkway, especially if you walk onto the walkway from a snowy area. It's also enormously misleading to show images of no snow and say, as Lou Smith did, showing the window grade area and say, see, there's no snow.
Now look at this photograph. The sidewalks are completely clear of snow. This is another angle. You not only don't see snow on the walkway area, but take a look at even at this table. There's no snow. There's no snow on the chair.
There's also no snow in the background as well, the lawn of the front garden, and we know from crime scene photos that there was snow. And remember, Lou Smith only arrived at the scene 3 months after the investigation started.
Even though he arrived 3 months after the murder, for Smith, the crime scene remained the most important part of his investigation.
Not 3 hours, not 3 days, and not 3 weeks. Sorry, Lou, there are some things that photos don't record, especially if you only arrive once the seasons have moved on. Because what's missing? Well, the time when these photos were taken, as well as footage of other areas, and also the way the scene evolved, including how the temperature changed and the path of the sun over and above the garden and the home, from when the incident occurred to when that photo was taken. In other words, the subtleties that go beyond the obvious, beyond what you see in a photo. And now none of this really matters, right, in terms of the snow narrative, because we're not here to talk about the subtleties of snow. If you've simply realized issues were brought up here about the snow that you've never considered, well, then we're ready to challenge your perception and intuition skills with the basement window. If, on the other hand, you are sticking to what you've thought all along, then you're probably not ready to engage with this cognitive challenge, which is to think along corridors of subtlety. Because what I'm trying to do is get you to examine old evidence with new eyes. So what do you say? Are you ready to do that? All right, so when I made that video a few days ago about the infamously troublesome basement window, this is really the meat and potatoes of what I really wanted to draw your attention to. So let's get to it. And that brings us to 7 slippery insights from the basement window. Number 1, a closer look at the smear. Lawrence Schiller describes the mark on the wall below the window as a scuff mark. Have you ever really thought about that? Have you ever taken a close look at that? Have you ever looked at a crime scene image up close of that mark? Schiller uses this word scuff 4 times in his book. Why? Well, presumably because it was made by a shoe. Was it though? And have you ever thought about this aspect? Trouble is, when Lou Smith demos getting in through the basement window, does he need to kick against the side of the wall? Does he leave a scuff mark of any kind when he enters through the window? Have a look. Well, why on earth doesn't he?
It really wasn't that difficult.
Now, what's quite interesting and maybe even a little disingenuous is the way that this demo is actually edited. You see Lou coming some of the way out the window, and then it's cut, and then suddenly is out the window. In other footage of the same scene, I believe Lou puts his hand up against the top of the basement, the ceiling, and then lets himself down. Also, for a truly effective demonstration, Lou needs to leave behind the same evidence the intruder left, namely, as I said, a scuff mark, while leaving behind no other evidence like the intruder left behind no evidence. And that means no holding onto the window as he does here, and leaving behind the spider web while leaving behind no clothing fibers. He also needs to perform the demo at night, in the middle of winter, when there is snow on the ground outside, and he needs to dress as warmly with thicker clothes as someone would coming from the outside would be dressed in the middle of winter. But more to the point, is that mark on the wall even a scuff mark? Let's have a look. Because this is what a scuff mark looks like. They're defined, they're often black and narrow. I agree with Cotton Star that it looks more like a liquid stain, and if it is, could it be that when the cops investigated the open window that night, the night the video was recorded, they lifted the grate and some snow fell through, some of it spilling against the wall? On the other hand, if it was made by a shoe, then wasn't it a wet shoe with snow under it? Except, how can that be if there was no snow? Sorry, Lou, you can't have it both ways. But there it is, subtle, isn't it? Number 2, the shard on the sill. If the window was broken from the outside in, as John says he did, surely all the glass would be on the inside. and yet the biggest fragment of glass that was found on the outside, or was it? Now you could argue that this shard sort of dislodged after the intruder passed through, fair enough, but then how come he didn't stand on it, either coming in, going out, or both? Another possibility is that this is the piece of glass Fleet White said that he picked up off the floor under the window. This is from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. He, meaning Fleet White, picked up the broken glass from the floor under the window and replaced some of it on the windowsill. But if Fleet could so easily find broken glass, why didn't the housekeeper see this, or the scuff mark, when the Pugh family were down in the basement over Thanksgiving and they were expressly there to clean windows, presumably only the inside? These are all the instances where the housekeeper talks about the broken glass. The Ramsey housekeeper did not remember anything about the broken glass in the train room, the scuff mark on the wall, or cleaning up glass underneath a broken window. That's from Boulder Police Report number 1. Meanwhile, the housekeeper's husband supposedly washed the windows at Thanksgiving time and supposedly went down in the basement and washed the basement windows. That's from Boulder Police Report number 5. The last time the housekeeper's husband was down there was around Thanksgiving. On that occasion, he cleaned all of the windows inside and out. That's from Boulder Police Report number 5. Now, it does make one wonder whether the window was really broken months earlier or whether it was broken during the kidnapping phase. If John did break it, why didn't he mention it right in the beginning? Because in 1997, he did say to Steve Thomas in a series of questions about the window that he thought it was dramatically out of the ordinary. Well, if it was dramatically out of the ordinary, why not tell someone? Now, Linda Arndt also said she lost track of John for a full 80 minutes. If her report is accurate, that's longer than an hour where she didn't know where he was. He was gone for so long, Arndt assumed he'd gone outside to collect the mail. But John said that wasn't the case. The mail slot was in the home at the front door. Anyone know that? Okay, so where was John when Arndt lost track of him? Well, by his own account, John made at least a visit to the basement alone sometime in the morning. I think that's also in the book that they wrote. Interestingly, in her own report, Arndt is clear that an officer, Whitson, told John that morning that the FBI were assisting on the case. So I'm not sure why John so often says he can't understand why Boulder PD didn't ask the FBI to assist them. John was told that the FBI was assisting them. Number 3, deformation of the glass. Now we get to the part I really want to talk about, and it really addresses the question, was the glass broken from inside the home, inside out, or outside in? Now, when John was asked, I think by Detective Steve Thomas, how he broke the glass, was it with his shoe or in some other manner, I don't think John could remember. Did you know sometimes when glass breaks, it sort of bends, not a lot, just slightly, in the direction that it breaks? Obviously not like wood or metal, but as I say, slightly. I actually once hit a windscreen in a vehicle collision, and although the glass didn't shatter, it sort of bowled slightly outward where my head hit it. I also remember taking small splinters of glass out of my head after the incident. What I'm suggesting here, and I realize it's subtle, is this. Look carefully. Isn't this jagged splinter bending slightly outwards at its edge? And if you follow that jagged silhouette to the left, isn't it also deformed slightly as well, that jagged silhouette in the same direction, outward, as the larger one? Number 4, crack in the grout. Is that black mark a crack in the windowsill or just bunched up dirty webbing? Like the smear on the wall, that's not a scuff mark. Spider webs don't often or easily make dark black lines, whereas cracks in grout do. If that is grout, is that grout bent outwards or inwards? Now, one of the ways to determine whether you are good or bad at subtlety is the speed at which you come up with an answer. The quicker you come up with an answer, the poorer you are at subtlety. The longer you can take keeping different thoughts in your mind, sometimes even contradictory thoughts, the better you are at subtlety. probably the more sensitive you are as well. In any event, if it is a spider's web, this crack in the grout, if it's not a crack but a spider's web, is the spider's web bent back on itself, or is it torn forwards through the window following the path of the shards? Interestingly, in the Amanda Knox case, there was a similar question. A rock had apparently been thrown from the outside in through a narrow gap in the closed shutters. The only trouble was that fragments of glass were found on top of clothes strewn on the floor, as if someone had first thrown the clothes on the floor and then thrown the rock against the window. In other words, it seemed staged. It seemed as if the glass was broken after the burglary. And, of course, nothing inside Filomena Romanelli's room was stolen either. Her laptop, after all, was still there. Her camera was still there. Expensive sunglasses were still there. Now, if the Ramsey kidnapper wanted money, and not a lot, just $118,000, why didn't he steal other things as well? Things that were lying around, like the camera. Number 5. Is that 6-month-old web waving in the midwinter wind? The camera struggles to focus here, but what it's trying to show are the gossamer threads, thinner than a human hair, flickering between shards of glass. Does that look like web that's been flapping in the wind for months, or has it been recently torn, and is quivering in the wind for a few hours before it will be gone altogether? The single thread, that single filament coming off that very sharp shard, can you imagine it swinging around for weeks or months? I can't. When Loosmit comes onto the scene, like the snow, the spider webs are gone, and he seems to forget to mention this important detail when he does his little gymnastics demo. Did he also forget to mention it to the grand jury when he presented his theory to them? I mean, the spider webs, because ultimately the grand jury didn't believe Smith's theory. So I guess what I'm asking is, doesn't it look like that window was broken earlier that same day? If so, you might say, well, surely it is a sign of forced entry. Well, except when the police went through in the beginning, several officers looking inside and outside, specifically looking for signs of forced entry, and armed with flashlights, and let's face it, broken glass shines pretty clearly when a light passes over it. Not only did they not find any sign of forced entry, they specifically asked whether there was any. They specifically asked Patsy. They specifically asked John. So if there was, why not say so? And if there was, how come all the officers missed it? Well, what if there was no sign of forced entry at 6 a.m., but suddenly there was? Now that the cops were making a big stink about it, suddenly there was forced entry late in the day. Well, if that's what happened, how did it happen? That brings us to number 6. Wasn't it broken all along? Now consider the fact that the window is broken in quite a strange spot if you want to get in. Look where the handle is. The handle is in the middle, this latch. We can see that in Lou's demo when he handles the handle. So why not break the window right next to the handle? You may also notice in Lou's demo, he pushes the window open because, why? It's already open. Fair enough. If John did it, that's how he found it. But even if John did it, do you mind showing us how he got his arm through this really jagged window at the top left and curled it down to the side to open the latch? Only an idiot would break a window to open the window that far away from the latch. But do you see, when you're some distance away, the top half of the window is actually obscured by the idiosyncratic design of the basement ceiling? That's also subtle. Have you noticed that before? Even with the window closed from the back of the room, you wouldn't notice the broken window in the top half unless you were standing a lot closer. So let's move closer. You may also notice that even when you're quite near to the window, the basement ceiling forms a kind of ledge which obscures the top half of the top window, exactly where it was broken. Ever noticed that before? That alcove in the ceiling is more evident in this image. So wasn't it broken all along? The clue to this, in my opinion, is that little thread, and also the thicker one in the corner, billowing in the wind. Would a fragile, thin thread like that be able to billow in the wind for 6 months? If that hole had been there for 6 months, wouldn't you expect it to look more like this? Also, doesn't this gob of web look recently dismembered as well? At another time of year, sure, you might not notice a broken window. In the middle of winter in Boulder, at the coldest time of year, while it's snowing outside, you very much would notice the room with the hole in the window is a lot colder than it should be, and you might want to know what the source is of this cold air. And so when Patsy was down in the basement on Christmas Eve rapping, or when a child came down to play, did they really not notice how cold it was there? And if they didn't notice, was it because it wasn't cold down there? We get additional support for this contention about being able to sense the cold in the middle of winter in Colorado from the actual fabric of the case. In fact, from that same morning during the kidnapping phase when John Fernie noticed a cold draft going through the house, and it wasn't a cold draft in the room, it was a cold draft coming from somewhere else. Sure enough, he traced it to a door on the north side of the house that was ajar. And what did he do when he found it? He shut it. Let's go to chapter 8 from Kolar's book, Foreign Faction. Fernie seemed to recall that someone, John Ramsey, thought had said that the doors to the home had been checked the previous evening and that all had been dead-bolted and securely locked. Ramsey had checked the doors again that morning to be certain that JonBenet had not gotten out of the house. But then at one point that morning, the time uncertain, but as police were processing the scene, I think this is quite an important point. As police were processing the scene, Fernie reported that a draft was coming through the house, and he located the source. The door on the north side of the house by the butler pantry was standing open, and he shut it. And didn't John say he did the same thing? He noticed the basement window was open, so he shut it. Well, didn't he do it to keep it warm as well? So if it was open all along, wouldn't anyone have noticed how unusually cold the basement was? Not just the folks passing through that morning, but on other days as well. And so over 6 months, didn't the weather coming in through that broken window, day after day, hot and cold, wind and rain, leaves and snow, dirt and insects, begin to gather in this part of the basement? Okay, so where is it? Where is this debris? Number 7, prints of broken glass. If the window was broken that morning, are these small discolorations in the dirt, possibly, and this is directly below where this broken window was, and this dirt seems to come from very, very fine dirt, possibly from melted snow. Is this where the shards landed and were removed from? Are these essentially the footprints of where the broken glass landed? Can you see those spots? Can you see those slight discolorations in the dirt? You can also very clearly see how filthy this window well is, not only covered in webs and powdery dirt, but filled with pine needles and other leaves as well. Another section even had popcorn packaging. In Lou Smith's demo, did he also have the same amount of dirt in the window? And afterwards, would the window well have looked like this? No scuff marks, no scrape marks, no knee impressions, no shoe prints, nothing after the scramble and crouching and shuffling to get in and out. Also, why isn't there any of this dirt on the suitcase beneath? Why isn't there any of this dirt on the floor immediately beneath? Also, wouldn't the intruder have the same dirt and webs on his knees, the bottom of his shoes, on his clothes, and on his hands? Does that make sense? Do you think that you've learned to appreciate subtlety through the course of this video? Do you think you're going to be better at subtlety in future? I hope so. Because the better we are at navigating subtlety, not the obvious things in life, but the less obvious things, the better we are at dealing with reality. And the better we are at dealing with reality, the more effective we are at navigating our own lives. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.